to my channel. In a previous little video, I just showed you my fairy house that I've recently made, that I made last week. It's from a Klux craft kit, a bit like the camper van I made, similar sort of principle, but this time it's an enchanted fairy house and 3 peg fairies. There's also a little fairy book you can create as well, which I haven't done yet, but I'm going to do that as well. So that was fun to make. A little bit easier than making a camper van, but similar sort of principle, just a bit more basic. I have picked up the crochet hook and tried the crochet. So far, I do find it rather complicated though. I think I managed to learn how to do a slip knot, which obviously, that's the basics really, isn't it? And I've learned how to do the chain stitch. But I'm struggling moving on from the chain stitch to the double crochet. And but again, bizarrely, recently I tried my hand at knitting, and knitting came to me straight away, which was quite surprising, because I thought knitting would be hard, because I read online that crochet is meant to be easier than knitting. But I decided to try my hand at knitting, and I was like, whoa, this is so easy, I can just pick it up. Like, it doesn't seem complicated at all, and I managed to stitch a couple of rows very easily and quickly. Like, whereas with the crochet, I mean, I haven't got too far yet with the knitting, and I'm a long way yet from actually making something. But the fact is, it just seems so easy compared to crochet, and I was wondering why this was. So I googled it, and apparently some people do find knitting easier. And one of the reasons for that is that crochet does involve quite a lot of spatial skills. Like with crochet, you have to move up, down and around, and that can be, if you have like spatial difficulties, and I have spatial difficulties, that can be quite hard to get your head around. Whereas with knitting, on the other hand, is a lot more linear and organised, methodical, logical, I think some people find knitting harder also because you have to hold 2 implements, 2 needles, whereas crochet you're just holding a hook. But I actually find it easier having 2 implements in my hands. I find it just feels easier, like my brain, I don't know, just finds it more natural. And I find the motion of knitting like a lot easier as well. So that was interesting. So I think considering I find knitting a lot easier, like I said, obviously I haven't got that far with it yet, and but it seems a lot easier, at least for me, to learn the first few steps, whereas with crochet I was struggling quite a bit. I think I'm actually going to focus on knitting for now, and I've got to get some hooks off Amazon for just a couple of pounds, which is a bargain really. Just like basic plastic hooks. And because that's all you need as a beginner. And I've already got a kid's guide to knitting, just like kids book. But I tried a YouTube tutorial, and it just like I just worked it out very quickly. So yeah, I'm going to focus on that for now, I think. I still want to try and improve. I still want to try and see if I can get further with crochet though, because I've mastered the chain stitch. It's just the double crochet bit I'm finding difficult, because it's like that spatial bit, and I get a bit confused. It messes my brain gets confused. Whereas because knitting, you're kind of just moving downwards. It's like linear. It kind of feels. It doesn't scramble my brain. But yeah, when I googled it, it did say that organised, methodical and logical people who find spatial skills difficult will tend to do better at knitting, so that must be the reason why. Because I am logical, organised and methodical, and I like linear, and I like boundaries, and I like clear directions. Also with knitting, by the way, there are far more patterns than there are for crochet as well, so it's easier to find patterns. So yeah, and I mean, obviously everyone's different, it's just a generalisation that you find crochet easier, it's just a generalisation, isn't it? It depends how your brain works, I guess, and what kind of, on one hand, knitting requires more dexterity on one hand, but there's also less spatial skills involved, and spatial is where I struggle. So yeah, that was interesting. Just the motion of knitting seems to come naturally to me, whereas crochet doesn't. Crochet feels very stilted. It might also be, of course, that when I was a kid, I did try my hand at knitting. I wasn't good at it at all, and I really struggled. But I did have a basic kids knitting set when I was a kid, so it might be that deep down in my brain there's still some motor memory there, muscle memory from back when I was a kid. And now I'm an adult, obviously I'm far more developed and can put things together a lot easier and understand things a lot more. So maybe that's also why it's coming quicker, because I already have some of that memory of the kind of motion already in my brain. You never really forget. It's a bit like when you learn to ride a bike. You haven't gone on a bike for years, and yet you still have that memory there, but you might just need to practice it. So yeah. So what else? So also, the other thing, by the way, I'm getting a Klutz finger knitting kit, because finger knitting is meant to be the easiest form of knitting. And that's the one that kids often learn first, because it doesn't require any needles whatsoever. I also had to go at finger knitting following a YouTube tutorial, and I found it quite easy. Obviously I want to develop it, because the motion is pretty simple really. You just have to wind the yarn around your fingers. There's a particular motion, and obviously it takes a while to learn it, because until it becomes repetitive, but the actual motion itself is very simple, so you just have to keep practicing that motion, and it's a doddle. You don't have to faff around needles or hooks or anything. So considering I found that quite simple and fun, and I want to find out how I can make things using hand knitting. Finger knitting, I'm getting the Klutz finger knitting kit, which has some projects in there, and very simple. All Klutz kits contain very simple instructions. So far, I found them very easy to understand. So hopefully this one will be the same. So that should be fun. So knitting, that's what I'm going to focus on. That seems to be the craft that feels most natural for me. I also trying to learn sewing as well, so we'll see how that one. I think sewing, when I say sewing, by the way, I don't mean anything complex. I just mean simple sewing projects. Because obviously for more complex ones, you need a sewing machine. I can't be asked for that. But simple sewing projects. I think sewing shouldn't be too difficult, because I have used needles before, but a very long time ago, and I just sort of remember it a bit, and it should hopefully be easier than knitting even, so hopefully. But yeah, I'll try that. So as I was saying, what else? Oh yes, and I've been watching. Recently, I've watched on Netflix Love on the Spectrum USA, because I'd already seen the Australian version, and I think I did a video on that last year, because there were 2 Australian series, and this year they've done a Love on the Spectrum USA version, which I've seen recently. I've seen all of the episodes. That was good viewing. It's a little bit like, if you're in the UK, there was a programme called the Undateables. It's similar to that, but it just focuses on autistic people finding, a date. Most of the people they date are also autistic, but not all of them. And it covers vastly different, how can I put it, different manifestations of autism. So some of them on there, are pretty able, and others are a bit more, what shall I say? What's the politically correct way of saying it? A bit more disabled, I'll put it that way. So it covers different, manifestations of autism. You get different, so there's one person on there called Danny who has her own company, animation company, and animation is her thing. And she was very keen on finding a partner who was equally interested in animation. That was like her top kind of priority. And she also wanted someone who had very good hygiene, and that was very important for her. Very clean teeth. Those were the things that were very important for her. But animation was the thing that she wasn't going to back down on. That was super important for her. She wanted someone who had a clear goal in life, who wanted to, who could be a business partner, basically. And she's got a company, I think it's called Danimation or something, can't quite remember, but it's an animation company. And then there was someone called Abigail, who was living with her mother. She came across as a bit more, what's the word? Her autism was a bit more, how can I put it? Obvious, I guess, is probably the way of putting it. I mean, she's a bit more disabled. She lived with her mum, and she was very interested in, I think it was lions. I think she had lots of stuffed toys and fairies and Disney princesses and things like that. I liked Abigail. She seemed a nice person. And she went out with, I can't actually remember his name, some other autistic person she went out with. And then there was another person on there, Kaylin, I think, who lived with her friend I actually remember where she lived. It was somewhere in North Carolina. I think it was Greenville, somewhere in North Carolina, something like that. It's in America. Whereas Abigail, I think, lived in California, if I remember. I think she lived in Los Angeles, actually, in California. I think that's where Abigail lived, if I remember correctly. I think Danny also lived in Los Angeles, but I can't quite remember. I think it was Los Angeles. But yeah, Kaylin lived in Greenville, North Carolina. She lived with her friend, and she was autistic, had ADHD, dyslexia, and I think she said dyscalculia. She had quite a few different conditions. And she trained dogs. She was a dog trainer, and she also had some other job helping autistic teenagers or something. And then there was there was someone called James who lived with his parents in Boston, and he was very interested in Renaissance fairs, medieval Renaissance fairs, something like that. He liked dressing up and role play and that sort of thing. And then there was there was someone called Steve. Was it Steve? Steve, who lived in San Francisco, and he had only recently been diagnosed. He was the oldest one, and he was in his 60s. And he was, I don't think he'd ever been on a date before. Was that all of the... Oh no, and then there was Saborn, an Indian young man, who... and that was quite interesting because his parents, because they come from a different culture, they're Indian, and they weren't used to dating because his parents had an arranged marriage, so that was all new for them. So they got assistance from someone called Jennifer Cook O'Toole, who happened to be autistic herself, but in her case, very, 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 very able, high functioning. But you're not really supposed to say it anymore. But I don't know how else you're supposed to say it. But anyway, has 3 autistic kids herself, and was recently diagnosed autistic, I think, in her 30s or something. I don't know how old she is now, but she basically came and gave advice, like social skills tutoring or advice to both Saborn and quite a few of them actually. I think she also helped Abigail as well. She seemed to have it all down to a T. She seemed to know all how to date, how to socialise, everything. It's interesting though, like I say, because obviously there are so many different variations of autism now. I think no wonder that's why it can be quite confusing. On one hand, you have people like Jennifer Cook O'Toole, who's got 3 kids, obviously can handle relationships pretty well and has a good understanding of relationships, enough to be able to even provide social skills tutoring. And then you have someone like Abigail, for example, who's came across as very socially naive, shall I put it that way. And Saborn, who was also pretty socially naive. So many different types of autism. It's quite... that's why I do sometimes think there should be subgroups, as I've mentioned. Otherwise, I'm not going to go into that detail now, but I do really think there should be subtypes, because to me, having autism is just one thing when it covers so many different types. I mean, I know they say it's a spectrum and everything, but there's a spectrum and then there's a spectrum. Sometimes I sort of feel the spectrum now is so kind of almost too diverse. Like there must be differences though between people like... Oh yeah, I'm just going to move on to video number 2 because I'm just waffling on. But moving on to video number 2 because otherwise this video's going to run out of me. So moving on to video number 2 now.